Executive Summary. This complaint alleges systemic mismanagement, misuse of public funds, theft in office, noncompliance with Ohio facility and safety laws, and potential procurement fraud within CMSD. Despite over $830 million in voter-approved funding, schools like Newton D. Baker School of Arts were neglected, unsafe, and ultimately closed without due process. This complaint requests a special audit, including financial, compliance, and performance reviews, to ensure accountability, protect students, and safeguard taxpayer funds. I am writing to formally request a special audit of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, CMSD, due to serious concerns regarding procurement practices, voter-approved bond expenditures, and the district's repeated failure to fulfill its most basic responsibilities. These failures have resulted in unsafe, neglected, and ultimately closed schools, even in stable and growing neighborhoods. Although voters have approved more than $830 million in levies and bond funding for Cleveland Metropolitan School District facilities, this investment has not translated into basic maintenance and safety standards. For over a decade, CMSD has consistently failed to conduct the required semi-annual facility inspections mandated by Ohio Administrative Code 3707.26. This neglect is particularly evident at Newton D. Baker School of Arts, where deplorable conditions persisted until its closure due to poor conditions. Trash cans collecting rainwater exposed students to potential health risks. Mold grew unchecked throughout the building. HVAC systems were never updated. Offensive graffiti, including swastikas and lewd imagery, remained for months or even more than a year. The gymnasium was rendered unusable for the entire 2024 to 2025 school year, depriving students of an indoor space for physical education. Rodents frequently ran through the cafeteria and other areas, creating an unsanitary environment. Cleveland voters approved $830 million in bonds for school construction and repairs, yet no oversight mechanisms appear to have ensured that even basic inspections were conducted. Trash cans collected rainwater, mold proliferated, and students were required to return to classrooms even after a partial roof collapse, without any formal inspection by the city to ensure safety and health. How such conditions persisted without detection raises serious questions about CMSD's internal oversight and external monitoring by state authorities. Even while under-enrolled, CMSD routinely denied neighborhood children admission, apparently to avoid hiring additional teachers. Class sizes swelled to 40 students in first grade, while students were placed on waitlist despite living mere blocks from the school. Families were forced to remove their children when the district refused to hire more teachers, while the district used artificially low enrollment numbers to justify neglect and eventual closure. Families purchased homes near the school specifically to meet their children's educational needs. In just 13 business days, and with no public comments allowed before the vote, the Combs Corner neighborhood lost Newton D. Baker, a school that had served a significant portion of children with disabilities. Unreported school closures and potential misuse of state and federal funds. CMSD has not reported the closures of Newton D. Baker School of Arts, IRN number 027102, and Walton School, IRN number 039149, to the Ohio Education Directory System, OEDS. By failing to update OEDS, the district may be continuing to receive state and federal funding for schools that no longer exist, thereby misrepresenting both enrollment and services. This omission raises serious concerns that CMSD could be improperly collecting funds for shuttered schools, an issue that demands immediate investigation. Bond Accountability Commission. The Bond Accountability Commission, BAC, is composed of individuals with exceptional credentials and proven leadership across architecture, engineering, law, construction, education, business, and community advocacy. Members include award-winning architects such as Jack Bialowski, Jr., distinguished attorneys like Nancy Schuster, licensed engineers like Lenora Lockett, seasoned executives such as Alfonso Sanchez, and community leaders with decades of direct engagement in education and civic development, such as Caroline Peak. Their collective expertise should make them more than capable of recognizing when fundamental processes, such as legally required and compliant school inspections, are not being carried out. Yet, Despite this wealth of knowledge and experience, the BAC appears unaware that critical school inspections are being neglected or improperly conducted. How is the Bond Accountability Commission making decisions about building repairs and investments if those decisions are not based on proper, compliant inspections? If repairs are instead being guided by the district's own predetermined choices about which schools they want to keep open, without transparent data, without compliant inspections, and without meaningful public input, then the Commission is effectively rubber stamping a flawed and biased process. Their oversight role loses meaning if decisions are based on incomplete or non-compliant information, and the public deserves answers as to why this disconnect exists. Voter-approved bonds and facilities spending. Since 2001, Cleveland voters have approved over $830 million in construction and facility bonds, including $200 million in 2015. $191 million remains unspent, with voters approving an additional $295 million in 2024, which Dr. Morgan lied to the community about, saying we only approved $100 million for the next 35 years during the board meeting on April 15, 2025, where it was voted on to close. Newton D. Baker School of Arts. Despite the large amounts of money available for permanent improvements, urgent facility needs go unaddressed, resulting in unsafe and unusable schools, such as Newton D. Baker. When a single complaint was raised, CMSD closed the school unilaterally, without public comment, forcibly relocating children, including those with IEPs, without due process. Shortly after, CMSD administrators approved 5% raises for themselves, raising questions about potential self-dealing. District responses to public records requests regarding bids for permanent improvements are incomplete. The district justified the closure by claiming $30 million in repairs were needed, yet no bids or estimates have ever been provided. Records requests are routinely denied to local watchdogs, families, and teachers asking for bids related to the $30 million estimate to fix Newton D. Baker School of Arts, saying it is too broad of a records request. The community estimates that the essential repairs, including a new roof and gym restoration, would cost approximately $2 million. While claiming a lack of funds, CMSD consistently prioritizes executive perks, cross-country trips, professional development, luxury office rentals, and nearly $500,000 in executive parking, even as millions in taxpayer funds remain unspent and properties sit neglected. Of the 2015 voter-approved bonds totaling $200 million, $191 million remains unspent nearly a decade later. Additionally, at the time of the vote, there was over $18 million in the 003 fund, which grew until the end of the year and was pushed forward into the next fiscal year. Despite millions in bond funds available for urgent repairs, the failure to perform required inspections allowed hazardous conditions to persist unnoticed, calling into question how both district leadership and state oversight mechanisms have been failing our schools for over a decade, and how repair priorities could have been set without lawful inspections guiding those decisions. The Chief Operations Officer has responsibility for the safety program of the district and the development of written procedures to comply with all applicable federal and state laws and regulations. The board directs the administration to develop a safety program, reviewed annually. It is the Board of Education's duty to review state and federal safety laws and ensure compliance. It was made clear in the board meeting that the board was not doing this, was not aware of their responsibilities, and that the district's explanation was blatantly not in compliance with state laws. Failure of core district functions. CMSD has repeatedly failed to perform its most basic responsibilities, undermining student safety, educational quality, and operational effectiveness. Core failures include denying neighborhood children access to their zone schools and manipulating enrollment figures to justify closures. Redacted text. Denying or delaying for substantial time releasing enrollment data requested through public records requests. Maintaining unsafe and unsanitary facilities, failing to conduct required inspections, and allowing mold, graffiti, and infrastructure deterioration to persist for years. Providing inconsistent transportation services, leaving students without reliable access to school. Mismanaging taxpayer funds, allowing voter-approved levies and bonds to sit unspent while simultaneously directing resources toward executive perks and luxury expenses, failing to provide adequate special education and support services, in direct violation of federal and state obligations to children with disabilities. Excessive administrative spending and misrepresentation of cuts at CMSD. The district has publicly claimed to reduce administrative costs, but the evidence demonstrates a pattern of misleading reporting and financial mismanagement that directly harms students. In May 2024, CMSD announced a 12.6% reduction in administration, claiming 62 positions had been eliminated. Public records and testimony show that only 23 of those positions were filled at the time of the cuts. At least 6 individuals continue to work for CMSD administration, some in the exact same roles, now at higher salaries. In at least one case, an administrator was laid off and rehired into a new position on the very same day. Despite the claim of cuts, the number of administrators earning more than $100,000 actually increased, from 77 before the layoffs to 95 afterward. CMSD now employs 44 executives, 73 directors, and 13 chiefs, more than before the reduction. Top administrators are paid more than their counterparts in comparable districts such as Columbus or Indianapolis, while CMSD simultaneously rents administrative offices at a cost of $2 million annually, despite having unused classroom space that could be converted into offices. Additionally, CMSD has spent nearly $1 million on questionable professional development contracts for administrators, including the Sister Accord and Equity Matters, $7,000 in tuition for a single administrator workshop, and more than $800,000 on administrator travel in just 1 year. This unchecked administrative spending directly undermines services for students. While administrative positions and perks continue to expand, the district has approved cutting 150 minutes of weekly instructional time for Cleveland children, a loss of classroom time that cannot be recovered. These actions demonstrate systemic misrepresentation of financial decisions, misuse of taxpayer dollars, and a pattern of prioritizing administrative comfort over student learning. I respectfully request a thorough audit of CMSD's financial practices with a focus on the accuracy of reported administrative cuts during the May 2024 layoffs, salary increases, reassignments, and same-day rehires within administration, the cost-benefit justification of office rentals compared to repurposing existing facilities, expenditures on professional development, tuition, and travel for administrators, the connection between administrative spending and proposed cuts to instructional time. Taxpayers and families deserve transparency and assurance that CMSD's budgetary decisions comply with financial accountability standards and prioritize student needs over administrative excess. Suspected procurement fraud. CMSD has entered into contracts that raise serious concerns regarding procurement fraud, conflicts of interest, and misuse of public funds. Vendors with less qualified proposals and higher costs have been awarded contracts over more capable, lower-cost bidders, suggesting bid rigging, abuse of discretion, or collusion. Equity Matters, informally DBA Accelerated Education Consulting. We are especially concerned about Equity Matters Consulting, a vendor that community members have previously reported to both the Auditor's Office and the Department of Education. However, prior investigations were so narrowly focused that even basic issues, such as the company's lack of state registration, went unnoticed and unaddressed, allowing this group continued access to our schools, which is particularly troubling given that CMSD has, in just the past 2 years, seen 2 sexual predators sent to prison who victimized children within the schools and in hotel rooms paid for by the school district. CMSD has awarded contracts to vendors with serious transparency and compliance concerns, raising questions about procurement integrity and oversight. Equity Matters Consulting and Accelerated Education Consulting appear to be operated by the same individuals, primarily Sonia Murray, and function as a single enterprise under 2 different names. These entities pursue identical goals, provide the same services, and hold overlapping contracts with CMSD, but the name change seems intended to obscure ongoing operations from federal authorities. Public information, including Sonia Murray's social media for the business, confirms that the 2 entities operate interchangeably, continuing so-called equity initiatives even after CMSD signed agreements with the federal government to discontinue DI-related programs. Equity Matters Consulting or Accelerated Education Consulting or Accelerated Education, fictitious name and MO, are not registered to do business in Ohio, but have received substantial payments to operate directly in CMSD schools with students. CMSD has created barriers for the public to determine whether consultants are present in Cleveland for more than 20 days, an important threshold for local tax obligations, by denying public records requests using the reasoning that the requests are too broad in scope. Sonia Murray previously worked for Achievement Network for over 3 years, ending in August 2020. Her prior employment appears to have facilitated subsequent no-bid contracts with CMSD. CMSD began issuing payments to Equity Matters by July 2021, creating a concerning continuity between past employment relationships and subsequent vendor payments. Business registration records highlight additional irregularities. Equity Matters Consulting is registered at Redacted, Address A, St. Louis, Missouri, 63110. Accelerated Education Consulting LLC is registered to the same Missouri address under Sonia Murray's name as of December 3, 2024. A related fictitious name, Accelerated Education Consultants, is registered at Redacted, Address B, St. Louis, Missouri, 63133, 2403, a residence owned by Sean Murray, likely Sonia Murray's brother. Redacted Address, Address A, St. Louis, Missouri, 63110 is owned by Michael E. Darden, likely Sonia Murray's husband. Despite frequent operations in Ohio schools, neither business is registered in Ohio or Illinois, raising potential violations of state business, procurement, and tax laws. These facts indicate a pattern in which CMSD awarded contracts to essentially a single business operating under multiple names, circumventing oversight, obscuring tax liabilities, and creating a high risk of procurement fraud, conflicts of interest, and misuse of public funds. Meme Styles Consulting. In 2024, CMSD awarded this vendor a professional services contract valued at $157,000. The company is not legally registered in Ohio, possibly not registered anywhere in the U.S., and its tax and insurance documentation appear invalid or potentially fraudulent. Public records released by CMSD were heavily redacted, preventing verification of legitimacy. The W-9 form is dated 2021, 3 years prior to the contract, with critical fields left blank. Liability insurance documentation is incomplete, raising concerns of false representation or insurance fraud. Meme Styles Consulting also appears connected to a network of other businesses with histories of tax forfeitures and lapses in registration, consistent with phoenixing, a practice in which dissolved entities are replaced with new companies to continue receiving payments while avoiding liabilities. CMSD selected Meme Styles Consulting for a contract despite the existence of demonstrably better qualified and lower-cost competitors, raising serious concerns of bid rigging, abuse of discretion, or collusion. Watchdog findings. 1. Vendor identification concealment. The vendor's full name and signature are fully redacted throughout the contract. On one page, the redaction was incomplete, revealing the vendor's name. This inconsistency suggests the concealment was intentional and not for privacy purposes. Implications. Redactions prevent public and auditor verification of the vendor's legal registration and compliance. Preliminary research indicates Meme Styles Consulting is not be registered with the Ohio Secretary of State and may not be registered anywhere within the U.S., raising questions about its ability to legally conduct business in Ohio or elsewhere in the U.S. 2. W-9 form irregularities. The W-9 attached to the contract is dated August 26, 2021, nearly 3 years prior to the execution of the 2024 contract. The EIN field is partially redacted and contains no numbers. The SSN field is blank. Signature and address fields are redacted. Implications. A W-9 without a valid EIN or SSN is invalid for IRS purposes. CMSD appears to have made payments without applying the required 24% backup, withholding for vendors lacking valid taxpayer identification numbers. The use of an outdated W-9 raises questions of document fabrication or recycling. Targeted redactions suggest deliberate concealment of the vendor's tax identity. 3. Certificate of liability insurance issues. The Accord Insurance Certificate redacts the NAIC number and policy number, preventing verification of coverage. The professional liability endorsement names CMSD as an additional insured, but the absence of a visible policy number makes enforceability impossible to confirm. Implications. Redactions prevent confirmation that the vendor maintains the required insurance. If coverage is invalid, this could constitute procurement fraud or false representation in CMSD contracting. 4. Pattern of redaction and concealment. Redactions systematically obscure vendor name, signature, tax identification number, business address, and insurance policy numbers. Implications. These fields are critical for confirming the legitimacy of a vendor. CMSD's concealment of these deficiencies, combined with evidence of payments made, raises concerns about potential misappropriation of public funds or fraud. Potential legal and regulatory violations. Wire fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Honest services fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1346. False Claims Act, 31 U.S.C. Sections 3729 through 3733, if federal funds were involved. Ohio Public Records Act violations due to improper redactions. Ohio tax code violations, including failure to withhold or report payments due to invalid W-9. The documentation surrounding the Meme Styles Consulting contract indicates CMSD executed a $157,000 contract with a vendor who may not be legally registered and whose tax and insurance documentation is either invalid or fraudulent. CMSD redacted the key information necessary to verify the vendor's legitimacy, effectively concealing these deficiencies from auditors and the public, suggesting potential tax fraud, wire fraud, and procurement fraud. The Sister Accord contract, potential conflicts. The Cleveland Metropolitan School District, CMSD, entered into a $200,000 contract with the Sister Accord, an organization founded by Sonia J. Miles, for programs described as women's empowerment coaching for district administrators at 1111 Superior. This contract raises significant concerns regarding procurement integrity, conflicts of interest, and governance oversight. Personal connection. Public records and obituary research reveal that Trent Mosley, CMSD's Chief of Excellence and Culture, formerly Chief of Equity and Culture, is a godchild of Nella D. Jackson, née Brewer. Nella Jackson is Sonia Miles' mother, Obit 001. This establishes a personal, familial relationship between a senior CMSD administrator and the owner of the Sister Accord. This connection creates the appearance of preferential treatment, raising questions about the fairness and impartiality of the contracting process. Procurement process concerns. The $200,000 contract was executed solely by the CMSD CEO without board approval, despite its substantial size and the potential personal connection between the vendor and a district official. By bypassing formal board oversight, the contract avoided transparency and competitive procurement standards, including requests for proposals or competitive bidding. Additionally, the services provided by the Sister Accord, team building, personal development, and empowerment programs for administrators do not align with core educational operations or direct services to students. The lack of alignment with district educational priorities, combined with the personal relationship, underscores the risk of procurement fraud, including conflicts of interest, favoritism, or self-dealing. This contract highlights systemic weaknesses in CMSD's governance and contracting procedures. If board oversight had been applied, the personal connection and potential impropriety may have been identified before approval. The current process undermines transparency, accountability, and public trust in the management of taxpayer funds. The Sister Accord contract, executed without board approval and linked to a personal relationship between a senior administrator and the vendor, demonstrates a serious risk of procurement fraud. This situation warrants further investigation to ensure all district contracts are awarded fairly, transparently, and in the best interests of the public and students. 3K9 Productions, LLC. Marquita Brooks is suspected of receiving favorable treatment due to suspected ties with former CMSD employee Candace Groves, who was employed by the district until December 2024 and has since moved to Portland Public Schools. The company's engagement during Candace Gross's employment at CMSD suggests possible conflicts of interest or insider influence in the contracting process. Records requests are routinely denied to local watchdogs, arguing that asking for contracts with 3K9 Productions LLC is too broad of a records request and would require an office-wide search. Bell Creek Consulting. This vendor has received CMSD contracts totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars over multiple years, yet it is not registered to do business in Ohio. Awarding contracts to an unregistered entity raises serious procurement and compliance concerns, as it undermines both state law and public accountability. The district's continued engagement with Bell Creek Consulting suggests a systemic failure to perform due diligence and may point to procurement fraud or willful neglect in safeguarding taxpayer funds. Potential misuse of public funds and theft in office. There is substantial evidence suggesting that senior administrators at Cleveland Metropolitan School District, CMSD, may have engaged in the misuse of public funds, rising to the level of theft in office under Ohio Revised Code Section 2921.41. These expenditures demonstrate a pattern of prioritizing personal comfort and non-essential spending over student needs and essential educational services. Notable examples include lavish office furniture purchases. Dr. Trent Mosley, Chief of Equity and Culture, and Dr. Warren Morgan authorized multiple high-cost purchases for their offices, including standing desks, ergonomic chairs, cooling and vibrating massage chairs, storage cabinets, and dry erase boards. Costs for these items range from hundreds to thousands of dollars per purchase. Many of these acquisitions occurred during periods of documented budget deficits, raising serious questions about their necessity and appropriateness. And several were egregious enough to receive media attention. Excessive event spending. CMSD spent $11,580 on tickets for Dr. Morgan's State of the School speech at the City Club, despite the district facing a major budget shortfall and declining enrollment. These expenditures did not directly benefit students and appear inconsistent with the district's stated financial priorities. Delayed payments causing personal risk to residents. CMSD repeatedly failed to process timely payments for book fare receipts submitted to Scholastic, resulting in collection notices being sent to private individuals, e.g., book fare chairs. This forced residents to manage financial risk for public funds that should have been properly handled by the district. Questionable administrative practices. There is evidence that CMSD's administrative team directs resources toward public relations and data manipulation rather than equitable student outcomes. For example, teachers were instructed to focus instruction only on students near proficiency benchmarks to improve reported test scores, leaving other students without necessary support. Collectively, these practices indicate a potential pattern of theft in office, misappropriation of funds, and fiscal mismanagement. I request that the Auditor's Office conduct a comprehensive investigation into these expenditures, including but not limited to documentation of all office furniture and equipment purchases for CMSD administrators, including costs, justifications, and approval processes, records of all event-related expenditures paid for by CMSD, including tickets, meals, and travel, evidence of internal controls, or lack thereof regarding timely processing of public funds, particularly in relation to payments owed to vendors or third parties. Examination of spending priorities in the context of district budget deficits and declining enrollment, including potential misuse of taxpayer funds. These actions, if verified, constitute a misuse of public funds that directly harm students, taxpayers, and the integrity of the school system. A thorough audit and investigation are essential to ensure accountability, transparency, and compliance with Ohio law. Say Yes program concerns. The Say Yes program raises a substantial number of red flags regarding its operations, financial practices, and reporting. The volume and seriousness of these concerns are significant enough that addressing them fully will require a separate, detailed complaint outlining allegations of extensive fraud, mismanagement, and potential theft. This narrative is intended to alert the auditor that the issues are substantial and warrant dedicated investigation. The Cleveland Metropolitan School District has become known not merely as a conduit from school to prison for our children, but as a system that endangers the well-being of the entire community. This reality is reflected in alarming rates of student suicides and the tragic loss of 4 special education teachers who reportedly took their own lives after repeated abuse from CMSD executives. The harm is not confined to classrooms. Parents themselves are facing a growing mental health crisis, directly fueled by executive bullying, alleged extortion, and systemic failures that leave families in despair. Public trust in CMSD leadership, including the Board of Education and the Bond Accountability Commission, has collapsed. Residents have no democratic avenue to change the CEO and are left to depend on state and federal authorities to intervene. The frustration is visible. Homemade signs denounce CMSD leaders as corrupt. Artists are creating entire projects to expose fraud. Watchdog groups are uniting, and social media platforms dedicated to holding CMSD leadership accountable publicly. Multiple petitions, at least 5 to date, demand sweeping change at every level of district leadership. The scope and severity of these issues go far beyond poor management. They represent systemic corruption, a pattern of negligence, and a public crisis that threatens the safety of children, parents, and teachers alike. We urge the Auditor of State to conduct an immediate, independent investigation and to use the full extent of your authority to enforce transparency, restore accountability, and protect Cleveland's public schools from further harm. This complaint, along with the cited references, are being submitted as a set of living documents, meaning they will be updated with additional evidence as new information emerges. However, due to the seriousness of the allegations, the volume of suspected fraud, and the breadth of issues affecting students, families, and teachers, it is imperative that this be submitted in its current form. Immediate attention is required, and supplemental evidence will be provided as the community's investigation progresses.